Welcome back to Math 109, Plain Trigonometry. In this video, we're going to take a look at what quadrants the different trig functions are positive. So first things first, we can use coterminal angles to determine what quadrant any angle is located in. Another key note we're going to make, so we can only talk about sine, cosine, and tangent here, is that if x is greater than 0, 1 over x is also greater than 0. And the same thing applies if I change that to a less than. If x is less than 0, 1 over x is less than 0. So that tells us the reciprocal of a positive number is positive. The reciprocal of a negative number is negative. So we're not going to waste our time talking about when the secant, cosecant, and cotangent are positive. So what we are going to do is we're going to go ahead and look at a coordinate plane. And I'm drawing this big so we can talk about things easier. Everywhere r is going to be positive. That's just a definition of the radius being the distance from the origin to the point, and we never talk about negative distance. So we have the cases of, in the first quadrant, x is positive and y is positive. In the second quadrant, x is negative and y is still positive. In the third quadrant, both x and y are negative. And in the fourth quadrant, x is positive and y is negative. So, the four trig functions that we have to deal with are sine, which is equal to y over r, cosine, which is equal to x over r, and tangent, which is equal to y over x. Now in the first quadrant, with all of those, we're dividing a positive number by a positive number. So, sine, cosine, and tangent are all going to be greater than 0, or positive. Now in the second quadrant, things are a little bit different. Y is still positive, so y over r is going to be a positive number divided by a positive number. So the sine is still greater than 0. However, for cosine and tangent, you're dividing a negative number by a positive number. So those will both be negative. Third quadrant, with both sine and cosine, we're dividing a negative number by a negative number. So sine is going to be less than 0. And cosine is going to be less than 0. However, tangent, we're dividing a negative number for y by a negative number for x. You'll recall if I divide a negative by a negative, that gives me a positive number. Then finally, in the fourth quadrant, we've actually done all of the work for this somewhere else. Because x is positive, the only other spot that we dealt with x being positive is the first quadrant. And in that case, when we look at what depends on x, the cosine. So the cosine is positive. The sine, we are dealing with y. Y is negative. So we go to the other spot where y is negative, and we see that there, the sine is negative. And tangent we haven't worked with in this case before, but in this case we're dividing a negative number by a positive number. So that gives us a negative number. So the tangent in the fourth quadrant is negative. So we have in the first quadrant with the three most useful functions. The first quadrant, all of them are positive. In the second quadrant, the sine is positive. In the third quadrant, the tangent is positive. And in the fourth quadrant, the cosine is positive. So there is a helpful mnemonic for you to remember this. It is all students take calculus. That's telling us in the first quadrant, all of the trig functions are positive. In the second quadrant, the sine is positive. In the third quadrant, the tangent is positive. And in the fourth quadrant, the cosine is positive. And like I said at the beginning of the video, for secant, cosecant, and cotangent, we can use the property that a reciprocal of a positive number is always positive, and then use whatever it's the reciprocal of to determine whether those functions are positive and negative. So that does it for this video. In the next video, we're going to look at a few more identities that we can derive from the basic definitions.